Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News, an Indian perspective on All India Radio. This is Renuka, and with me is Abhineet Shukla, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. North and South Korea test ballistic missiles, raising fears of arms race on the peninsula. European Commission President says EU should seek to beef up its military capabilities to confront security threats and global crises. In Afghanistan, major row broke out between leaders of Taliban just days after formation of new government. Boris Johnson carried out the first major shake-up of his senior ministerial team by sacking 3 cabinet ministers and removing Dominic Raab from the Foreign Office. India is fast emerging as world space hub for cost-effective launch of satellite, says government. 4 private citizens set to launch into orbit Wednesday in first mission to space without any professional astronauts on board. As a nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact national helpline numbers 011 2397 8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. North and South Korea have tested ballistic missiles hours apart from each other, highlighting an arms race on the peninsula as nuclear talks with the North remain stalled. The North fired 2 ballistic missiles across its east coast, its first test with such missiles in 6 months and a fresh breach of UN resolutions. The tests came as South Korea and China discussed the North's nuclear issue. Hours later, the South tested its first submarine-launched ballistic missile. The test of the missile, known as the Submarine-Launched Ballistic Missile, or SLBM, was pre-planned and not in reaction to the North's latest launches. It makes South Korea the 7th country in the world with such technology. President Moon Jae-in, who attended the test, said South Korea now had sufficient deterrence to respond to North Korea's provocations at any time, urging the South to continue increasing its weapons programs to overwhelm North Korea's asymmetric power. The comments were criticized by Kim Yo-jong, sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. She described them as illogical and regrettable and warned that they could lead to a breakdown in ties. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said the EU should seek to beef up its military capabilities to confront security threats and global crises. She told the European Parliament on Wednesday that she believed EU military forces will be part of the solution. The EU needed the political will to intervene militarily without the US after the fall of Afghanistan. Mrs. von der Leyen said in her annual State of the Union address that France would host an EU defence summit next year. The European Union has relied historically on the NATO alliance for military action. Earlier this month, German Defence Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer called for intense talks on making the EU a strategic player to be reckoned with. The UK's departure from the EU has also brought security into sharp focus. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said this month he supported EU plans to build a common defence policy, but warned against the creation of a new military forces. The Commission President also said that the EU would stand by the Afghan people and increase humanitarian aid for Afghanistan by $118 million. Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen also pledged to accelerate the rate of COVID-19 vaccinations around the world, offering another 200 million jabs for low-income countries.
In Afghanistan, a major row broke out between leaders of the Taliban just days after they set up a new government, reports BBC. Supporters of two rival factions reportedly brawled at the presidential palace in the capital, Kabul. The argument appeared to center on who did the most to secure victory over the US and how power was divided up in the new cabinet. The Taliban have officially denied the reports. The group seized control of Afghanistan last month and have since declared the country an Islamic emirate. The dispute came to light after a Taliban co-founder, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, disappeared from view for several days. One Taliban source told BBC Pashto that Mr. Baradar and Khalil-ur-Rahman Haqqani, the Minister for Refugees and a prominent figure within the militant Haqqani network, had exchanged strong words as their followers brawled with each other nearby. A senior Taliban member based in Qatar and a person connected to those involved also confirmed that an argument had taken place late last week. Meanwhile, Pakistan's envoy to Afghanistan, Mansoor Ahmad Khan, met the Taliban interim government's acting foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, and discussed strengthening bilateral cooperation between both the countries. Khan tweeted that he called on the new Afghan foreign minister and discussed strengthening bilateral cooperation, particularly facilitating humanitarian, economic and people-to-people. This is the first meeting between a Pakistani official and a representative of the interim Afghan government. Afghanistan's female players of junior national soccer team have entered into Pakistan. The girls had spent the past month in hiding amid fears of a crackdown on women's rights by the Taliban. The RL side flew out of Kabul last month, but the youth team were reportedly left stranded as they lacked passports and other documentation. 32 players and their families won visas after lobbying of the government by charity Football for Peace. Officials said the group, totaling 115 people, will travel from Peshawar to the eastern city of Lahore, where they will be housed at the Pakistani Football Federation's headquarters. Women were barred from participating in sports during the Taliban's last spell in power from 1996 to 2001.
Minister of State for External Affairs Meenakshi Lekhi paid an official visit to Portugal from 12th to 14th of September. During the visit, she had an in-depth review of the bilateral relations with her counterpart, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, Mr. Francisco Andre. This was followed by the signing of the milestone bilateral agreement on the recruitment of Indian citizens to work in Portugal. Portugal is the first European country with which India has signed a dedicated agreement on labour mobility. This is also the first such agreement signed by Portugal outside the EU. The agreement sets out the procedures for recruitment of Indian workers and professionals in Portugal and will open up new employment opportunities for Indians, further strengthening the socio-economic linkages between the two countries. In her meeting with the Minister of Culture of Portugal, H.E. Dr. Graca Fonesca, Mrs. Lekhi explored avenues of cooperation in the field of culture, such as exchange of youth and literary delegations, establishment of Maritime Heritage Gallery at Lothal. The heads of tax authorities of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, held a virtual meeting on Wednesday under the chairship of India. Mr. Tarun Bajaj, Secretary, Revenue, Government of India, in his capacity as Head of Tax Authorities in India, presided over this meeting. The BRICS tax authorities engaged in discussion on the challenges faced by BRICS tax administrations in the digital era, coupled with outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, sharing experience and devising strategies to overcome those challenges. The broad theme of the meeting was redefining business processes of tax administration amidst challenges posed by COVID-19 in the digital era.
Minister of State for Commerce and Industry Anupriya Patel has said that the gems and jewellery sector contributes around 7% to the GDP and employs 50 lakh people. She was speaking at a function to mark the 37th edition of India International Jewellery Show, Premier 2021. She said the sector has been one of the worst hit sectors in the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. The minister said the Gems and Jewellery Export Promotion Council has undertaken prompt measures. As a result, the sector has shown a swift recovery and witnessed a positive growth of around 15% in the fourth quarter. This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
In Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson carried out the first major shake-up of his senior ministerial team by sacking 3 cabinet ministers and removing Dominic Raab from the Foreign Office. In his cabinet reshuffle, the Prime Minister sacked Gavin Williamson as Education Secretary, Robert Buckland as Justice Secretary, and Robert Jenrick as Local Government and Community Secretary. Raab switched from Foreign Secretary to Justice Secretary following the UK's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and criticism that he did not have a grip on the crisis. Johnson also appointed Raab as Deputy Prime Minister, but the changes to his role were seen by Tory MPs as a demotion. Amanda Milling was meanwhile removed as chair of the Conservative Party.
Vice President and Rajya Sabha Chairman M. Venkaiah Naidu, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla on Wednesday jointly launched the Sansad TV. The launch date of Sansad TV coincides with the International Day of Democracy. In February this year, a decision was taken to merge Lok Sabha TV and Rajya Sabha TV and rechristen the merged entity as Sansad TV. The programming of this TV will primarily be in 4 categories: functioning of Parliament and democratic institutions, governance and implementation of schemes, policies, history and culture of India, and issues, interests, concerns of contemporary nature. In his address, the Vice President said that we are the most vibrant parliamentary democracy in the world, and this event highlights the important linkages between the media and democratic governance. Mr. Naidu said, Parliament and legislatures have a key role to play, and there is a need to have meaningful debates echoing people's aspirations.
The new combined channel is expected to bring in synergy and economies of scale, as well as provide a window to the vibrant democracy that India is. It is significant that the Sansad TV Parliament channel is being launched today to coincide with the International Day of Democracy. We are one of the oldest democracies. We are the most vibrant parliamentary democracy in the world. This event symbolically highlights the important linkages between media and democratic governance.
On the occasion, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, India is the mother of democracy, and for it, democracy is not only a constitutional structure, but a national spirit. In his address, Mr. Modi said, the day of launch of Sansad TV is adding another important chapter to the country's parliamentary system. He said today the country is getting such a medium of communication and dialogue in the form of Sansad TV, which will serve as the new voice of the country's democracy and people's representatives. The Prime Minister added that the 21st century is bringing a revolution in communication and dialogue, and in such changing times, it becomes necessary that the channels associated with Parliament should also transform themselves according to these modern arrangements. Mr. Modi said that he has been told that Sansad TV will be on OTT platforms, social media, and will have its own app as well.
अपने नए अवतार में संसद टीवी सोशल मीडिया और ओटीटी प्लेटफॉर्म्स पर भी रहेगा और इसका अपना ऐप भी होगा। इससे हमारा संसदीय संवाद न केवल आधुनिक टेक्नोलॉजी से जुड़ेगा, बल्कि आम जन तक उसकी पहुंच भी बढ़ेगी। आज ये सुखद संयोग भी है कि 15 सितंबर को इंटरनेशनल डे ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी मनाया जाता है। भारत लोकतंत्र की जननी है। भारत के लिए लोकतंत्र केवल एक व्यवस्था नहीं है, एक विचार है।
Mr. Modi said, as we are celebrating Engineers Day today, we should not forget that engineers play a key role and hold a prominent contribution to the TV industry. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the Defence Offices complexes in New Delhi on Thursday. He will visit the Defence Office complex and interact with the officers of the Army, Navy, Air Force and civilians. The new Defence Office complexes will accommodate around 7,000 officials, Defence Ministry and Armed Forces, including Army, Navy and Air Force.
Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has said the Indo-US cooperation will go a long way to restore normalcy, besides further boosting the economic dynamism. He said pandemic has brought new challenges in terms of disruption to supply chains, downturn in industrial activities, negative growth in travel and tourism industries. Mr. Singh said this while addressing the Indo-US Economic Summit, organized by the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce through a video conference. He said the economic and technological cooperation between India and the United States became stronger in the post-Cold War era, much stronger during the global war against terrorism and still more robust alongside Indo-US strategic partnership. The minister said the foreign original equipment manufacturers can set up manufacturing facilities individually or partner with Indian companies through a joint venture or technology agreement to capitalize on the Make in India opportunity. Science and Technology Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh has said that India is fast emerging as world space hub for cost-effective launch of satellites. Speaking at the India Leads 2021 summit organized by the FICCI in New Delhi on Wednesday, he said India has earned worldwide recognition for launching lunar probes, building satellites and ferrying foreign satellites. Dr. Singh said, over the past few years, space industry is emerging as one of the most lucrative industries globally, and demand for nano, micro and mini satellites and reusable and small satellite launch vehicle systems are anticipated to drive the market.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a brief discussion on evolving role of the Indian Ocean and its impact on regional security. In conversation are External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Dr. Ashley J. Tellis, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Now, I cannot tell you what a privilege it is and what a pleasure it is for me personally to welcome Dr. Jaishankar, India's Minister for External Affairs. He's had a very distinguished career in the Indian Foreign Service. He served as India's ambassador successively to the Czech Republic, to Singapore, to China, and the United States, before retiring literally at the acme of his bureaucratic profession when he served as Foreign Secretary. He was also pivotal, actually, to the achievement of the US-India Civil Nuclear Agreement, right from its early days, when it existed in embryonic form as the new steps of strategic partnership, all the way to the end, when we completed the many serial steps in the completion of the agreement. He's had a career in the private sector where he worked for the Tatas and is also the author of a remarkable book called The India Way, which I reviewed actually for Carnegie a few months ago and which I would commend to the readership of all those viewing here. I wonder whether those pressures of fragmentation still do not persist. May not be in a colonial guise, but in the guise that there are new architectures, new infrastructure plans, etc., that have had the consequence of actually dividing the region in many ways rather than achieving that ambition of unification. In other words, if there are geopolitical pressures that are pushing for fragmentation, can this fragmentation be overcome by alternative instruments relating to economic integration, soft security, and so on and so forth? How do you see the struggle between fragmentation and unification today going forward?
I think it's a very good question, and quite honestly, Ashley, you kind of improved on my observation. I think you've set it out in a very sharp, conceptual way. In a sense, I would argue both fragmentation and unification are extreme positions. Fragmentation, past fragmentation, there could be new fragmentations, and while we want more integration, if that happens in a sense under the rubric of a much more unipolar worldview, then I would argue that is obviously not in the overall interest of the region. So as always, or not as always, but as very often, I think the best answers lie somewhere in the middle, which is why the middle path is embodied with so many virtues. And to me, the middle, getting the balance right would be actually create a much more participative, much more consultative, in a sense, a much more coordinated, cooperative kind of Indo-Pacific. Now, I recognize it's easier said than done. And, some weeks ago, I had actually spoken at some length in Australia, and you're contrasting how actually Europe has dealt with these challenges as opposed to Asia. And the fact is, we in Asia are struggling with for a variety of reasons. So I think a lot of what you are going to see now, which you already see, these are those efforts. And certainly I think I'm just giving you Quad as an example because of my last comment. It is an effort at cooperation between four countries who are actually located in a sense at four corners of the Indo-Pacific, but who are all impelled by a sense of responsibility for global and duty towards a global, who have found it possible, who have the comfort today to work with each other. Mind you, each one has made an extra. It wasn't something that was predestined. In fact, recent history was a little different, but they've all tried to overcome that, approach their global responsibilities with a more open mind, and I think are trying to say, okay, how do we work with this? I think that the other efforts, as I said, there are many trilaterals out there. The East Asia Summit and the ASEAN forums also themselves add to some of this. So you will have, it's a big region. It's a very complicated region. It will have many building blocks of many kinds. And the right thing is to be open to all, rather than, get into a very binary with me against me kind of a.
Yes. The success of the U.S., particularly in the Indo-Pacific space, will depend so much on our attentiveness to the concerns of individual players in the region, which is, instead of thinking of them as purely objects in a larger contest, to sort of internalize their concerns and work with them. Now, you mentioned in your remarks the effort and the investments that India is making, for example, with respect to HADR, with respect to maritime cooperation, environmental management, disaster relief, the whole 9 yards. The question that lurks at the back of my mind is that will these investments in what you might call low politics, and by that I don't mean it's unimportant, but just the world outside of geopolitical competition, will these investments in low politics suffice to bring the region closer to the unity that you described as once characteristic prior to the era of colonialism? Or will these efforts become victims of these larger tectonic struggles at the level of high politics? Just practically, given the investments that you've seen India make in the last 3 to 4 years, how do you see this shaping up?
Theoretically, your question is a valid one. Obviously, anybody in the policy-making world would like to see the best outcomes of their policy. So my answers are inherently biased here, which is I would like to see this succeed. I would like to see greater cooperation. We have tried not to play into a polarized world scenario. So I'm not suggesting it would be easy. I'm also not in denial of the realities of geopolitics, because I do it for a living. But my sense is it should be our endeavor to try to widen the areas of convergence and commonalities, because that is how regions actually develop. My sense is if you actually ask people philosophically and even practically, saying, look, would you like to see some kind of lowest common denominator which is continuously raised in terms of what are the common interests of the region? I think almost everybody would say yes. Now, there will be, when there are difficult relationships, I think they will have to be, in a sense, reconciled with this direction. That process will have its challenges. But again, I would argue that such a vision, and it's not just a vision, I think there is a practical basis for it, actually will have a dampening effect on very sharp competition. That, as it is, in a sense, globalization is a constraining force, yes, in the way international competition works. But I would argue that, the more platforms you have, the more people work with each other, the larger the consensus. I think all of this will be contributing. So, to my mind, rather than, you post it in sense of unification, fragmentation, I would also say stability, instability. And to my mind, these are all stabilizing. We'll never have perfect stability, but there'll certainly be mitigative and contributive factors to how the region will.
And you have a great asset going in, and the asset you have growing in is that almost every country in the region shares these goals, as you pointed out. Every country in the region wants to protect its independence, wants to protect prosperity, wants to deepen the linkages. The question I have, and I want to transition to a second theme in a minute, but the last question I have on this theme is, do you believe that the community of countries that care about freedom and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific are applying the right quantum of resources to attaining these objectives? Or is there still a gap between what our aspirations would require us to do and what we're actually doing.
In the real world, actually, there'll always be a gap. There will always be a gap because our aspirations will always be ahead of reality. Our promises will always be ahead of performance. It's in the nature of public policy making. And again, if you look at it, a lot of countries, even before the COVID, but especially after the COVID, are extremely concerned about rebuilding at home, most notably the United States. And therefore, a lot of foreign policy and strategic postures will be based, they will not be capability driven or resources driven. They will be capability and resources optimized. But we'll have limited capability and resources. The task will be bigger than those capability and resources can address. And my sense is we'll both be creative on how we use it, but creative also in terms of understandings and arrangements. Look at the evolution in the thinking of many, many countries in the Indo-Pacific. One of the big changes today is the fact that there's a greater willingness to work with us. And the United States, I think, in my view, has been especially notable in making that transition.
In the United States, 4 private citizens are set to launch into orbit Wednesday in what will be the first mission to space without any professional astronauts on board. The all-civilian crew will ride to space aboard a rocket and capsule developed by SpaceX. The mission, dubbed Inspiration 4, is just the latest milestone flight in what has been a busy year for private spaceflight companies, following joyrides to suborbital space by billionaire entrepreneurs Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos over the summer. The spacecraft is scheduled to launch Wednesday atop a reusable Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida.
India's COVID-19 vaccination coverage has crossed 76 crore landmark milestone on Wednesday. The Union Health Ministry said more than 57 crore vaccine doses have been administered as first dose and over 18 crore vaccine doses have been given as second doses. The new phase of universalization of COVID-19 vaccination commenced from the 21st of June this year.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Globe and Mail says SpaceX set to make history with first all-civilian crew launched into orbit. Sputnik News reports Taliban leaders reportedly clash over division of power in new government. Financial Times says Eurozone wages fall for the first time since 2011, easing inflation fears. The Sydney Morning Herald writes China's ambassador banned from entering British Parliament. Wall Street Journal reports Google fined $177 million in South Korea over thwarting potential Android rivals. South China Morning Post says China shuts schools and events as Delta raises coronavirus alert level in South. The Guardian writes that Osage Nation leaders decree sale of sacred Missouri cave with ancient artwork.
In the UEFA Football Champions League, Group F opener between Atlanta and Villarreal ended in a 2-2 draw at the El Madrigal in Villarreal, Spain on Wednesday. 2 goals from Robert Lewandowski and 1 from Thomas Müller propelled Bayern Munich to a 3-0 win at Barcelona in their opening game. Juventus ended their winless streak by defeating Malmö 3-0 at the Swedbank Stadium in Sweden in the Champions League opener. Lille played out a goalless draw in their first match against Wolfsburg at Stade Pierre-Maurice Stadium, France on Wednesday.
A quick look at the headlines once again. North and South Korea test ballistic missiles, raising fears of arms race on the peninsula. European Commission President says EU should seek to beef up its military capabilities to confront security threats as global crisis. In Afghanistan, major row broke out between leaders of Taliban just days after formation of new government. Boris Johnson carried out the first major shake-up of his senior ministerial team by sacking 3 cabinet ministers and removing Dominic Raab from the Foreign Office. India is fast emerging as world space hub for cost-effective launch of satellite, says government. 4 private citizens set to launch into orbit on Wednesday in first mission to space without any professional astronauts on board. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnavajan, by artists from Fiji. And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.